Welcome back to Gathering Folds. Today we're going to be folding this pattern with more repeats on a 32 fold triangle grid on a hexagon. And this is one that until last night actually, I couldn't figure out where I had seen it. I knew I had seen it on Flickr, but I couldn't figure out whose design it was. And it turns out that it's by Christianne Bettens, and the name is Eric's Pajarita. When I didn't know her name for it, I called it Isoarea Ivy. So that's the name in the title of the video. And one of the things I want to emphasize with this tutorial is that we can see the same pattern in multiple different ways. We can see these shapes that are underlying the pattern itself, and we can see them in this star with triangles, and then there's going to be more stars around those triangles, or we could see it as 3 rhombi around a triangle and repeats of just that motif. So seeing the pattern in different ways allows us to figure out, okay, from this crease pattern, and go ahead and screenshot that, it'll be useful later. What is the sequence that we should be folding? So the sequence part is coming from the tiling, where I can say, okay, I want to do the 6 twists in the middle, and I'm going to need to, along with that, have a little bit more for smooth boundaries in the tiling. I'm going to need the triangles, the 6 triangles, and half of the next rhombus, which we won't squash, we'll just lay down as a triangle wrap. And then the next layer around actually does get me a smooth boundary. And I believe that's the last smooth boundary that we'll see as we work our way out. But we can use this idea of, oh, we're adding 1 layer around the center at a time. I mean, in the very beginning, we're doing 2 layers out just to hit those rhombus twists. But that is the idea behind the sequences that I say to fold. So coming back to the paper, and welcome Erlu and everyone in the chat. We're going to start by finding the center of the paper. We're going to fold in half in one direction, and then find the fold that goes to the corner in another direction. That is the center of our paper. And now that we've identified the center, we can go ahead and zoom in. So I'm going to go ahead and mark this side A, because one of the things that's interesting about this pattern is that we do have our same motifs showing up on both sides of the paper. So we're going to start with a set of mountain and valley folds around the center that I'll mark out. And there's different levels of marking. Like, of course, you can draw the whole crease pattern onto your paper, but you don't really need to. And I'll illustrate what I'm doing and then tell you how you can do it without drawing as well. So I just reoriented my paper so that vertical grid line, or so that I have a direction of grid lines that's going vertically up and down. And I'm going to count 1, 2, 3 spaces out on those grid lines. So 1, 2, 3 spaces, and I'm drawing a mountain fold. In this direction, I want to count 1, 2, 3 spaces out and draw a valley fold. Oh yeah, so Erlu was exploring some other patterns and found one that's very similar to this design. And by the way, Erlu, there's an even bigger similarity that I'll emphasize as we're going through. So these 2 folds are both representing pleats going into the same twist. So there's then a valley fold outside of the mountain fold and a mountain fold outside of the valley. And we are going to have the mountain that's closest to the center be the through line that goes through our first rhombus twist. So we're going to set up that first rhombus twist. And if you wanted to do this without drawing, the way that I would look at it is, okay, I have my mountain fold 3 spaces from the center. This is an aligned grid, a standard grid. So when I bring that fold down to the corner, that's going to be 3 spaces away from the corner. Likewise, my valley fold here is 3 spaces away from the center. That means when I bring it out to the edge of the paper, it is 3 spaces away from the corner. And then the mountain fold is 1 space out. And then I would look at this and say, oh, I want to make this a rhombus, and I can either look at the crease pattern or use familiarity with rhombus twists to say, oh, this is the one that has to go all the way through. And then we can press and squash. Yeah, so early, one big difference between this pattern, this Isoarea Ivy, or I found out last night, the original name was Eric's Pajarita, is that this pattern doesn't have any hexagon twists at all. It's all rhombus and triangle twists. So that's an interesting difference, even though we can see some of the same motifs. So from here, we're going to flip over to the B side, and I'm going to lift up my paper and use light shining through it, which is not very visible on camera, but that is the point of the center. I can also say, hey, my mountain fold is meeting my valley fold over there, and 3 points, or 3 grid spacings in, is the center of the B side. And we're going to continue this pattern around the center where we have our folds 3 spaces away from the center. And so here I have and they're going to alternate valley, mountain, valley, mountain. So here I have a mountain fold. That means that the next fold is going to be a valley fold. And I can go ahead and set up that fold. And here the mountain fold is once again going to be the through line of the rhombus. So from here, we want to squash the rhombus, and then we have that pleat overlap. And we saw in the tiling, that is going to be resolved by 2 things that are triangle shaped. One of those triangles is actually going to become a triangle twist, and the other one is going to become half of a rhombus twist. In this particular pattern, those are both going to be on this side of the paper, on the A side. So I can open up and find these 2 3-way intersections of mountain folds that are 2 grid spacings apart, and set up. One of the things that you'll see is in this pattern, the pleat from the pointy corner of the rhombus always goes to the triangle. The pleat from the opposite pointy corner is going around the open space in the center. And I can squash my triangle, leaving this 3-way intersection kind of floating to the side, and then fold the second one down on top. And now that I'm on this side, I'll repeat the process with the next rhombus. So it's easier with these rhombi. Like you might have seen me do patterns with 6 triangles in the center, in which case I would do the ones on both sides of the initial triangle first, and then come over and do 2 more on the other side. It's easier with these guys to just pick one direction and continue around. So our next one, we have a mountain fold. We need our next valley, 3 spaces out from the center. Now, it is possible with this same start, and this is where the comparison comes in to the holly pattern that Early was talking about. It is possible to put the triangle twist on the opposite side of the paper off of this same pleat, and then have that pattern continue. And that's something that I'll be showing with denser spacing, actually, in Advent of Test this year. There's actually going to be 2 variants on that, because these patterns are actually super flexible. You wouldn't think that like the rhombus and triangles and these positions of threefold symmetry would be as flexible as they are and still have all the pleats match up, but it really works out. So again, this pleat overlap caused by putting in the new rhombus, we're going to flip to the opposite side, and that's going to turn into these 2 3-way intersections of pleats separated by 2 grid spacings. And then with this flap that's going to become the next rhombus, you can either tuck it under and try and squash over it, or let it lift out of the way while you squash the triangle. It just kind of depends on your comfort with squashing and how your paper deals with bulk under it while it's being squashed. And then coming around, we can continue on the same trajectory. One of the things that I'm noticing is that the corner of one rhombus is always 1 space past the closed slit of the previous one. So I don't even really have to count to 3. I can just count, okay, 1 space here, and that's where the next pleat comes in. And I'm causing that pleat overlap. I'll leave that in place while I squash the new rhombus, and then flip over, open up the pleat overlap, turn it into the triangle, the 2 triangle intersections, one of which we will squash and make a closed triangle twist, and the other will lay down flat for now. And rotating, we want to do that again, but we have this extra pleat running through the space that we want to use. So we have our new valley fold going up that way. One of the things that I notice is that the angle between these 2 pleats that are meeting is 120 degrees, and therefore I'm going to be able to put in a triangle wrap. So for those of you who haven't seen this move before, what I'm doing is setting up a 3-way on screen, setting up a 3-way intersection of folds, of pleats rather, from the opposite side of the paper. So if we flip over, this is just a regular normal 3-way intersection of pleats. But I'm setting it up from this side of the paper because that's the side that I'm currently working on. I don't feel like flipping the paper over, and I'm trying to set up this twist anyways, so even if I flip to the other side and fold that 3-way intersection, I'm not going to be done with my move until I flip back and fold the rhombus in its entirety. And here again, we have that pleat overlap that we caused. So I'll flip over and set up the triangle and the three-way intersection. And so you can see that, well, I'll go and fold this final rhombus really quick. You can see that if I was to actually go and fold the next rhombus, that would start to cause problems. And while I'm here, I have this pleat overlap that I need to deal with on this side anyways. I'm going to go ahead and do that before dealing with the other pleat overlap. So now that's our final pleat overlap. At this stage, I'm going to flip back to the A side and get that in place. So now we've arrived at this condition where we have no pleat overlaps. We have three-way intersections, but we don't have any pleats overlapping with other pleats. So that is really the goal when we're folding origami tessellations one twist at a time, to minimize the pleat overlaps. And so this is kind of the game that we're playing of we want to add a layer of twists around the center, but we want to minimize the pleat overlaps. So what I can see, and I'll take us back to the tiling again, is that we folded these 6 twists in the center, we folded the 6 triangles outside of them, and we have these triangle-shaped interactions of pleats that belong to rhombus twists that are kind of cut off by our pseudo tiling break. Our next tiling break is actually a true tiling break, and we can read right off of this tiling that we are going to be finishing the rhombus that was left as a three-way intersection. We are going to be folding 2 more rhombi, so we're going to be finishing the motif with the 3 rhombi around the triangle, and that gets us to the next rhombus that we need to finish, and then 2 more rhombi. Rhombus to finish, 2 more rhombi. So that's going to be our sequence of folding as we go around. And coming back just to the paper here, I'm going to start with one of those rhombi that needs to be finished. When you have a three-way intersection defining a rhombus, the central diamond of the rhombus is sitting right on top of that three-way intersection. And you can see right away, if I fold that whole rhombus, I cause a pleat overlap. Now, where is the twist that's going to be folded on that pleat overlap? That is going to be a rhombus twist on the back. So I'm leaving this motif. The thing that to remember about this pattern is each of our rhombus twists on one pleat, they go to a closed triangle on the same side. On the 3 other pleats, they go to closed rhombi on the opposite side. So this pleat is not going to a triangle because we already have a pleat going to a triangle. It's going to a rhombus on the opposite side. And to make that rhombus on the opposite side a bit easier to fold, I'm going to open up the pleat overlap and put in a compound wrap. This is a move that borrows from the Muraori corrugation. Let me grab that. I have the demo beside me on the desk. So this is a really standard corrugation, and you can see that I'm doing precisely the same thing in here. I've got a zigzag going in and out. Now this zigzag is continuing further, and this zigzag is continuing further, but it's the same idea that you have these pleats in place and they're able to zigzag together. So that's what's going on for the compound wrap. And we can squash our new rhombus twist. Flipping over to the opposite side. Now, when we want to open up our compound wrap, we're going to open and take that point that's sunk down and pop it up. And that gives us already all of the mountain folds that we need. So notice when that point was tucked down, we have these same mountain folds as when we pop it up. And those are exactly the ones that we need for this closed rhombus twist. And now I know that the sequence that I said in the tiling diagram was, okay, we do this rhombus finishing the three-way intersection, then we do two more, and then we finish the next one with the three-way intersection. But since we're on this side of the paper, it's going to be convenient to just go ahead and do this rhombus anyways. And in this case, we're going to have new rhombus twists on both of these pleat overlaps. And so I'm going to do a compound wrap over here. So I'm letting the valley run through and popping down this mountain fold, letting the valley bounce down to where the valley fold of this pleat is sitting down below, and following the zigzagging of the valley fold with a zigzag of the mountain fold of this pleat that's coming through. This one is a little bit of an easier case. I could do it just as a pleat overlap, no problem, or I could also do it as a compound wrap, either way. And squash the new rhombus. This has completed one of our little ivy motifs. And one of the things I want to mention is this sequence of folding is going to be pretty much the same, no matter whether the triangle is on this side or the opposite side of the paper, whether it's on the pleat from the pointy end or the pleat from the fat end of the rhombus. Any of these options are going to work. So then we can flip over and we have two of these compound wraps that we're turning into new closed rhombus twists. One thing I will say though is that you'll want to look at the crease pattern for these different motifs, or start from the motif itself if you're folding directly on the grid, because they use different spacings around the center. And that is something that is a fixed thing once you pick the motif in this tiling. So we have our second compound wrap. And actually, if you're looking for the crease patterns, they are in Tessellation Garden. I have 3 crease patterns in this tiling. This one I don't count as one of my designs because, as I mentioned at the beginning, I found it when I was reverse engineering a bunch of designs early on in my tessellation folding. So all 3 of the ones that I do count as my own designs are in Tessellation Garden, and this is the Star Rhombi 1 triangle tiling. So, like I mentioned in the beginning, there's that Star of Rhombi, there's 1 triangle around it. There's a bunch of other tiling, Star Rhombi 2 triangles, Star Rhombi 6 triangles, Star Rhombi cluster 4 triangles. Some of these that I'm mentioning are not in Tessellation Garden yet because I'm doing alternate endings of the 2 patterns that I've mentioned, of like having the closed triangle on the opposite side from these rhombi, and I'm doing alternate endings of those for Advent of Tess this year. So what I just did is a repeat of finishing the previous cluster. I did a compound wrap over here, and here it's kind of ambivalent. I just left it as a pleat overlap. Flipping over, I can take that and make a new rhombus twist. So one of the things to notice is that if you were trying to fold this by completing the motif and then moving on, you would be missing this extra rhombus twist in each corner that is helping to preventing more pleat overlaps. And rotating around, we'll repeat rhombus 1 that is completing the rhombus from the 3-way intersection of pleats that we already had. Doing a compound wrap over the pleat that's heading down to the next motif. And we can do either a compound wrap or a pleat overlap for the pleat heading off to the edge of the paper. Technically, both pleats are heading to the edge of the paper, but one of them's going kind of under an existing pleat and the other's going over. And that's kind of the distinction in what's needed. So this one wasn't locked at all to bring up. The other one, if I had not done the compound wrap, would be very stuck in place. And that's something that you'll build an intuition for as you fold more and more of these patterns. So I can actually go ahead and show like what would happen if I just did pleat overlaps instead of compound wraps. Our first overlap further out, no problem. Our second overlap, I really have to pop out from underneath, which also was not a huge struggle. So if you're struggling with the compound wrap, just go with the pleat overlap. It's going to come undone in just a moment anyways, because we're going to be folding that next twist where those pleats are overlapping. So in here, I'll demonstrate that compound wrap once again. So that's really just shifting the popping move earlier when this pleat isn't flat yet. And that's going to make it a little bit easier, at least in theory. And now for this final pleat overlap, this new pleat is coming in on top. So I am going to want to set up the compound wrap instead of doing a standard overlap. But again, it's recoverable on the other side, no problem. This is just best practices and my folding habits. And that's our final rhombus in this ring around the center. We have enough grid to get into the next ring. one of the things that I'm noticing is that these guys are exactly the same as these guys. So I can go ahead and mark on my paper, like, okay, that's a repeat of the center. That's a repeat of the center. And go ahead and say, okay, these are my references for the next folds. So I have these identical points. So these two are the same as these two. And similarly, these two slits are the same as these two. Same orientation, same everything. So these points that I've marked are exactly the same as the center points. When we're folding this next layer of twists around the center, one thing to be aware of is that the rhombus may not be fully folded by the time we get through one layer, because they're 2 layers thick in one direction. And so I haven't drawn out the tiling for this. We get to freestyle what that looks like and figure it out as we go. So I'm going to very much hedge and like lean on the side of maybe we don't fold this twist all the way through. So I'm going to rotate to a side of the paper where my pleats, so I'm going to have 3 parallel pleats on each side. These pleats are coming from, at least the first 2 are coming from rhombus twists on the back side of the paper, which around the center is the condition necessary to have the next twist on this same side. And the next thing I can do is just like I did around the center. I'm saying, okay, 1 space out from this slit, I'm going to have my next fold going around. And when I set up this fold, I would set up the whole rhombus, but that's causing problems on pleats that are not the set of parallel pleats I'm currently working on. So that'll become a rhombus eventually by the time I work my way around, but right now it's going to lay down as a 3-way intersection. Then coming on around, I have this pleat coming down. If I had more grid, these would be overlapping. And I can say, okay, I'm going to also need a mountain fold in here that comes and runs into the next rhombus on this side. Now, I could go to the other side and say, hey, I need a valley, and that's going to need a triangle intersection as well. Or I can just say, well, that's going to be a triangle wrap. I'm going to come around here and put in place my next rhombus twist. And this one is going to be a full rhombus because this pleat that's not going directly into other existing twists or the future triangle is parallel to this direction that we already have going out to the edge of the paper. And so we can squash the rhombus, and then we see these pointy tips going into a 3-way intersection. That's our next triangle twist. We can squash the triangle. And now we're looking at the next direction of parallel pleats. So rotating around this next direction, my first pleat is coming out of that triangle that we just put in. So that's kind of a signal of maybe don't squash this one. Maybe just set it up as a 3-way intersection, which we don't even have enough grid to do, but that 3-way intersection would be at this point 1 grid spacing out. And that pleat is going to feed down into the next rhombus twist. And the way that it hits this edge, this existing pleat, there's a 60-degree angle between those folds. So we're going to need a compound wrap. So 60 degrees, compound wrap, 120 degrees, triangle wrap. And if I had more grid, I would leave that bit to squash in a later ring around the center. But because we only have 32 grid divisions and we're right at the edge of the paper, I'll go ahead and squash that partial twist, because it's not going to be sending the pleat that it would be sending if it was a full rhombus. Then coming down, this rhombus is on the opposite side of the paper, on the A side. So I'm going to flip over and open the compound wrap to put in the new rhombus twist. This is exactly the same position in the pattern that we started with our three-way intersection that we did first in this ring around the center. And it shows that once we get around, we will have that pleat to turn it into a full rhombus. So now we're going to do the same steps on this side, where we can say, okay, I need to have 1, 2, 3 spaces along this valley fold, my new mountain fold, and that mountain is going to go up into a twist on this same side, which I'll lay down for now while we get the triangle wrap set up for the twist in between. This is going to be a full rhombus twist, and we're going to have a closed triangle between the pleats of these two rhombi that are close to each other. And squash. Now we've exhausted the pleats going this way, and it's time to move to the next set of parallel pleats, which, as we saw in the previous sequence of moves, is going to turn into a three-way intersection that we're going to go ahead and squash because we can't get more pleats because we ran out of paper, into a compound wrap that we're going to flip the paper over and turn into a rhombus twist, closed rhombus twist. And then we find the mountain fold around the repeat of the center, setting up a three-way intersection as a placeholder for that next rhombus. And we get our full rhombus twist on the bottom end of that with a triangle twist set up with the interaction of the next pleats. And press to squash. And then we loop. We're on to the next set of parallel pleats. So we're going to do those same moves again. We've got that partial rhombus that we would have left as a three-way intersection, but because we're at the edge, why not? And flipping over, we can turn that compound wrap into a closed rhombus twist. And find the next mountain fold around the duplicate of the center, putting in a triangle wrap, so leaving that three-way intersection to be a future rhombus, and finishing this final rhombus. So we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the rhombi around the duplicate of the center, and just one of them is left as a wrap. So we get the rhombus and the triangle. And then we shift to the next set of parallel pleats. Where we would be leaving a three-way intersection, but again, not enough grid. And flipping over, we did a compound wrap, so that becomes a rhombus twist. And this whole process of, okay, I'm just adding one layer of twists around the center at a time. That is so much more predictable and more, well, I'm going to say less frustrating than trying to say, okay, I recognize this motif. I want to finish the motif and then have a royal tangle of pleat overlaps that you're not necessarily doing compound wraps to resolve things because there's so many different overlaps in the same place that it's just a mess. This method of, okay, we're working our way around, we're adding one layer of twists around the center, whether we repeat or whether we complete the motif or not is completely secondary because we'll get there eventually. What matters is that we're not causing unnecessary pleat overlaps, and we are completing twists when we know that they won't cause more problems. And that is not to say that we won't have pleat overlaps, that we won't have a lot of pleat overlaps, especially as we go further and further out. Every time you start a new set of parallel pleats, you will have the number of pleats -1 overlaps as soon as you put in the next twist. But we're not doing 2 layers at a time, so we're not doubling that number. Here, I've made my way all the way around, and I already have a triangle wrap in here. So when I go to put in my next triangle compound wrappy thing, what I get instead is 3 pleats going into a half hexagon tube, or actually no, it would be 2 of the pleats, but that is something that can lay down flat. Again, this would be a 3-way intersection, but because we're right at the edge, we may as well squash it while we're here. And then flipping over, we can convert this arrangement that's laying flat into a rhombus twist. And that's a matter of identifying which pleat is the through line of the rhombus and laying all those pleats down in the appropriate orientation. So now we've got the same thing all the way around, and we have a bunch of these 3-way intersections that we left behind. Because we are at the edge of the grid, on this 32 division grid, we can just go ahead and turn all of those into partial rhombus twists. So I can go ahead and do all 3 of the ones on this side. Notice I'm pivoting the corner of this over. I have that kind of through line of the rhombus thing going on, but this isn't adding any new pleats to the paper, which is kind of a trick because the mountain fold would be right on that edge. And you're welcome, Mike. I'm happy to teach, and I'm glad that you're enjoying learning about tessellations. And then flipping over, we need to remember to take care of these 3 on the opposite side as well. And you'll notice that these are rotating the opposite direction. So we have the same things on both sides of the pattern, but the rhombi on the A side are right-handed and the rhombi on the B side are left-handed. So once we squash these final bits of the pattern, we have our Isoarea Ivy, or original name Eric's Pajarita, on both sides of the pattern. So this is both a tutorial of this pattern and a introduction to this idea that you can take the shapes in the pattern and turn them into a different representation of the pattern, the tiling, and use that representation to tell you what to fold in each layer around that center. This is super helpful with complex or unfamiliar tilings. And the tiling is just another name for the way of arranging the shapes. And whenever I'm folding a new pattern, I always look at the tiling first, especially if it's a tiling that I'm not familiar with. So happy folding, everyone. Look forward to more patterns in this tiling in Advent of Test this year in 2025 in December. And go ahead and try folding this pattern for yourself. It's pretty straightforward. You get to practice the triangle and compound wraps, and you get this amazing pattern that's the same on both sides. So happy folding, everyone, and see you next time.